Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our most recent event around this time on economics and consulting. This is an occasional series that we are doing in the economics department here. I'm Tony Lasasso, by the way, and this is an occasional series that we've been doing, focusing primarily on health and the healthcare sector. In the economics department here at DePaul, we're focusing a lot of our energies on bringing health and healthcare analytics across the curriculum at the undergrad level, at the grad level, at the MBA level. And we're delighted to be joined today by a few former DePaul students who are now at Ernst & Young Parthenon, EYP, and they're going to be telling you all about how economics informs a lot of their consulting work. So I'm going to turn it over to a DePaul econ grad, Mike India, and he's going to take over from here. There will be time at the end for Q&A, so please hang around. This will be an hour. Thanks.
Thanks, Tony. Good afternoon, everyone. As Tony said, my name is Mike India. I'm a partner with EY Parthenon here in Chicago, where I also did my undergraduate work in economics in the College of Commerce there some years ago. Still live in the Chicago neighborhoods, nonetheless. Very happy to spend our time with you today. And if it would be okay, just for the team to do a quick introduction to themselves, and then we'll just kind of jump through the material. Melinda?
Perfect, thanks, Mike. Melinda Durr, I'm also a partner within the healthcare strategy team. I lead our payer strategy area. I also am a native Chicagoan. I'm a reformed economist. Unlike some of my colleagues, I actually had intended to be headed the Federal Reserve for a good amount of time and ended up in healthcare consulting. So understand where you guys are today and thinking about different options for your career. And, just Tony, to echo what you said, I think economics is the best foundation possible. So excited to be here. I'm in Logan Square as well. Love Chicago and excited to talk to you guys. So June?
Thanks, Melinda. Hi, everyone. My name is June Song. I'm a senior director in our EY Parthenon healthcare practice. I specialize in M&A transactions. I'm also based here in Chicago. I am not a DePaul alum, but my two boys go to a school that's affiliated with DePaul, Francis Xavier Ward. So we get basketball tickets, and we are a fan of DePaul. So, and this is really the favorite part of what I do, really being on campus and speaking with students, undergrad and graduate students who are interested in consulting and also in healthcare to really network and help people navigate through career choices and hopefully bring many of you on board as well. So look forward to meeting you all. Jackie?
Yep. Hi, everyone. My name is Jackie Mazzucato. I'm a director in our Atlanta practice, also in healthcare. I spent a couple of years in Chicago, lived right next to DePaul, and ran through the campus all the time. It's so beautiful. Very jealous of you guys enjoying this fall weather, but really excited to be here today. And thank you guys for having us. Kristen?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kristen Little. I'm originally from the Chicagoland area, grew up in Gurnee, Illinois. Went to UIC undergrad, DePaul Graduate School, and just got my MBA at Emory in Atlanta, which is where I am now. I am a consultant in our corporate and growth strategy practice, and I'm excited to be here today.
All right, and then I'll close this out. I'm Danny Azim. I'm also out of the Chicago office. I'm a senior associate, and I was actually in your place a couple of years ago. I graduated from DePaul about 2 years from the Treehouse School of Business with a finance degree, and so I was in a lot of your places here. It's been a great 2 years so far. I am a senior associate in like the general practice, and so I do some of the M&A work, some of the working capital work, and just kind of touch different areas within EYP. So very happy to be here with you guys today.
Great. So Jackie, let's jump in. And Dr. Lasasso, this is the sort of ceremonious slide thanking you. So I know you said you didn't want the spotlight on you that much, but we're going to put it on here for a second. Thank you for the time and the endorsement and kind of corralling people today. So Jackie, let's jump in. I think these first few slides are mine. So we're going to start with just a little bit of an overview of what we are and who we serve and how we work, just to give you all some perspective of how some of our training, is put into practice in the market. So Ernst & Young, as I guess many of you may know, is a very large professional services firm, namely focused in finance and accounting and audit and tax services. We are a part of what is called Ernst & Young Parthenon, which Parthenon is a strategy firm that is aimed at the three sort of Venn diagram circles on the page. Number one, corporate and growth strategy, very broadly speaking, turnaround and restructuring strategy, and transaction M&A strategy, merger and acquisition strategy, and executing on that. So the three circles overlap in the center, and our practice sort of leans into each of these in different ways. If I had to boil down very simply what it is that we do, we use our insight on the markets that our companies that we serve operate in, and we explore where the assets and the capital that they have and or are trying to put to use should go to help serve a need in the market, fulfill a gap in a market, achieve growth, and in some cases take capital off the table in a divestment and repurpose it in a different way. So, these three things, while each individually are unique, they all share a common interest, which is they all exist in the market, they're all accessing capital, and they're all putting capital to use. And the way that we choose to serve them is to try and help them find the best use of it and move and execute that strategy forward. So in a nutshell, that's kind of the most simplest way that we perform our work. So Jackie, if you keep me going. So you heard a lot about the folks on the call today, myself included, focusing on healthcare. And you might be saying, why is this so healthcare focused? Is this all they do? The answer is no. We break the market up into these 10 sectors that you see on the page here. And we have a little sort of box here in the lower left around the healthcare market. And we're going to talk a lot about that today because it's an area of mutual interest for those of us on the EYP side on this call, but also I think many of you on the call from DePaul. But also, I think more importantly, because healthcare is, at least in my view, and I know I'm biased, one of the most interesting markets that exists, especially US healthcare. There's a lot of markets, as you can see here, but the fragmentation and the sheer size of the US healthcare market and the sort of strange interplay in that market between the government and municipals and private equity and corporate for-profit publicly traded strategic companies. And then you throw the Catholic Church in there and mission-based organizations. It's really an interesting mix that drives roughly $4 trillion of the US economy. So anyway, we'll focus a little bit on that because I think it's a really good test case, petri dish, for how we bring our services to market. So this page here is a little bit of a double click into when we say the healthcare market, who on earth are you guys talking about? So we kind of break it into three segments, although there's a lot of convergence that takes place between these segments. And that is anybody who delivers care. Literally think, go to the doctor, get a vaccine, hopefully in your arm, get dispensed a pill, go to the hospital, have an inpatient visit of some sort. Anybody who delivers care is what we call a care delivery provider. And that's a very big market we'll see here in a second. And then the middle piece is, I think, what all of us commonly see most. Some of us probably don't love all that much. Some others may love it quite a lot, is the health insurance side. So this is really where the market pays for the services delivered on the left. And in some cases, this is, a mix of sort of not-for-profits, government, and, very large corporate publicly traded health insurance companies. And then on the far right is this interesting mix of, really, for the lack of a better phrase, it's a lot of things, but what we call healthcare services. And we say investors here because we've got private equity laid out, but really, this market is so big and so fragmented and so inefficient that there are a number of subsectors that are quite profitable, quite interesting, certainly very innovative, that serve as the glue between the value chain of the patient, the care delivery, how the care is provisioned and ultimately, migrated in location and ultimately paid for. There's a lot of companies that sit between it, in the value chain, and we serve them a lot too. And then in the bottom, you can see just, maybe a brief smattering of some of the clients that we serve. But you'll see, again, it's a mix across the spectrum. And there's, private equity funds that run a lot of investment in these subsector elements that we serve as well. So let's, Jackie, keep going. And this is, I think, the last page before Melinda kind of takes it from my hands. So really, trying to give you a sense for what we do. And I think rather than putting a long list of, what specifically do you do on the page, we thought about this slide. And what this slide shows is the questions that we generally most commonly answer for our clients, whether it be a financial investor or a corporate client. But I think the top and the bottom two are probably the most prevalent. How do I improve the profitability of my business? And that goes for the not-for-profits too. As the nuns say, no margin, no mission. Believe me, they'll say that every time, probably mostly behind closed doors, but they will say it. And then at the very bottom, how attractive is this market? Those, I think, are some of the principal first questions that, if you go back to that Venn diagram, that typically get asked at the outset of any of our work. And then just not going around on each of these remaining 6 items here. What is the portfolio should I invest in? By that, I mean, what assets or what services or what products or what markets? Should I actually not be in an asset or a company or a service? Should I consider divesting it, harvesting that cash, and putting it to a different, higher and better use? And then you can kind of go around the wheel here, but you see there's a lot of buy versus build questions. Is there a way to sort of cut costs through scale transactions, things like this? So in a nutshell, these 8 questions are what we seek to answer with our clients. And I think the next pages are Melinda's to talk a little bit more about the healthcare trends. Melinda?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Mike. So I'll walk through a couple of pages. We'll leave time for questions, so you can either write them in the chat or once I'm done, we'll give you an opportunity to ask any questions. But so this is one of my favorite slides and one of my least favorite slides. It's my favorite slide because as a data nerd, I love it, right? It gives you a sense of the complexity, the fragmentation, the actual spend of healthcare. As a partner in a consulting firm, I hate it because it's a very difficult slide to present, and people tend to get lost in the details. And so it's a balance. But really what this is showing you is just the vast amount of healthcare expenditure. And, if you took this from when I started working in healthcare in the early 2000s to now, the overall volume of spend would have changed, but the relative distribution actually it wouldn't have changed as dramatically as you see. So every year we are faced with increasing costs. The exception was 2020, when expenditures actually went negative for the first time in 60 years. And as I say, it only took a global pandemic for us to have declining costs within healthcare. We are expecting again to be back in 2021 at our average growth rate. So I think that negative number for 1 year we'll take it as a win, but isn't the answer. So if we flip to the next page, one of the things, as Mike said, a lot of what our clients are asking about is, how do we think about our business within the context of a dynamic market? And especially during COVID. So we had spent a lot of time, especially in March and April of 2020, thinking through, how is the market going to react? What should we expect? And so you see on the left-hand side, a projection that our economist, Nigel Galt, created in terms of GDP trend of how we thought the economy would or wouldn't bounce back, right? So you see the trend line pre-COVID, and then you see a base, a pessimistic and an optimistic case. And we spent a lot of time working with our clients. And as Mike said, not only on my side, payers, but providers, private equity firms, vendors, to really say, what is the potential impact of coronavirus, right? How do we think about it in a way that helps us make business decisions? And really a lot of what has come out, and I think you'll hear Mike and I and the team talk about this, is, we are starting to see the diversification within healthcare, the focus on outcomes, the realization that our cost and value curve is fundamentally misaligned. And so a lot of these conversations we're talking through, how do I look look around the corner? How do we think about market forces as an opportunity for me to diversify my business or change my business or reposition my business? And so that's a lot of the conversation that we've been having. So on the next page. So overall, you know, a number of key trends and market forces that really, you know, we tend to anchor on with our clients, and really are the drivers as we think about what are new strategies, what are new acquisition opportunities or divestiture opportunities, and how do we help our clients win in the market. So the first is around care affordability. I don't think I need to explain that, but cost reduction, thinking through how do I manage my individual lines of business or service lines? How do I think about my care model? How do I think about a path to risk eventually? Jackie, actually, if you could just go up one more, I'll do a quick flyover. The digitization of healthcare, right? We would not be doing this in, you know, if this was 2 years ago, we would be in person. And so I think everyone has the realization that there is an opportunity here for us to interact in a very different way, whether it's through the experience, the analytics, or actually thinking through the delivery of care through different channels. Sites of service transformation, so very closely linked to the digitization of healthcare. How do we think about moving outside of the four walls of either the office or the hospital? Who is the right set of patients that can be served differently, and how do we think about that, right? So from telehealth, hospital at home, ambulatory network, and then obviously there's a real estate play here, right? That Mike and I have colleagues that spend all of their time kind of thinking through that, right? What is the right real estate portfolio and footprint if I'm not going to be going to my primary care clinic for care on a regular basis. The fourth is the establishment of strategic relationships. So as I said, you know, the hot topic in healthcare is I'm a diversified healthcare player. And I hear that all the time. And my response is always, what does that mean? Right? So thinking through whether it's JVs, thinking through your flow of funds, onshoring, offshoring, different types of businesses, those are a lot of the conversation. And then finally, thinking through, you know, the capital infusion and where honestly the money is going from new entrants, right? So whether it's private equity, non-traditional players that are starting to emerge in the healthcare space, and employer groups who are thinking differently through healthcare benefits and their role in the ecosystem. So Jackie, if you wouldn't mind flipping the page, I think I talked a little bit about care affordability, and I think this is my last slide. But as you know, when we think through care affordability and what really does it take, you know, to bend the cost curve, I don't think there's one answer. I think it's a component of multiple answers, but really focusing on population health and adoption. And what we see across different types of players, whether they're traditional payers, and you see that big circle at the top middle of traditional Medicare Advantage players, all the way through to kind of health ACOs or risk-bearing physician groups, you see people starting to think differently, right? And actually bringing together the insurance side or the dollar side, right? And the care delivery side. So we talk a lot about integrated payviders, which is really just payer and providers put together. It's not my favorite term, but it's a term I've learned to adopt. And really just thinking through how can we better understand the population? How can we drive care intervention? How can we align incentives between payer, provider, and member with the ultimate objective, not objection, of moving from sick care to healthcare. So Jackie, if you wouldn't mind flipping to the next page. Mike, is it back to you or to June?
I think this one's June.
Perfect.
Thank you, Melinda. So Melinda gave a actually really nice overview of the digitization of healthcare. Jackie, why don't we move to the next slide? I do want to do a little bit of double click into that and also share a little bit about what we do around that space. And digital data analytics has become so crucial to the healthcare industry overall. We ourselves look to hire analytical people, economics mindset, and analytical people, which is why we're here. And if you look at the data that we work with, not too long ago, when you think about healthcare data, people generally thought it was just really the clinical data, the patient data, data around access to care and quality of care. But recently, it's become really more about much broader socioeconomic data, health behavior data, and physical environment data. What I hear a lot is around health equity, and now in a lot of our hospitals and care delivery organizations are being measured around health equity, which is really driven by understanding the socioeconomic data and health behavior data, and those data really help our hospitals and care delivery organizations make care delivery decisions, where to make the investments, how to coordinate care better. And these data are all very sensitive data. And we have a client, I do want to talk about a case where one of our clients are using these data in a very de-identified way very well. So Jackie, can we go to the next slide? I want to walk through a live case of what we do. And this is a transaction that Mike, Jackie, Melinda, I think you're involved as well. Many of our healthcare practices are involved in. So Cerner is our nation-leading electronic healthcare records company. They provide healthcare technology and data to the healthcare industry. Had acquired Kantar Health from Kantar Group. Kantar Health is a life science research company that uses real-world evidence to really help life science companies commercialize their products and do all sorts of market research. So we help the Cerner really find their target and evaluate their target, and we perform diligences early on in the year around their commercial diligence and operational diligence, financial diligence, to really help evaluate their asset and really get them to make a decision to bid and buy. And after they had signed, we had also supported them from sign to be able to close the business as well, to really help prepare for those two companies to come together. So once we help them close, and then we help them really integrate, make the marriage work, to really understand how are they going to grow their top line together? How are they going to change their go-to-market strategy? How are they going to utilize the de-identified data to take it to their life science clients? How are they going to integrate the back office and realize synergies and mitigate dyssynergies, all these M&A terminologies? So this is kind of, I'm just talking about my life over the last 12 months with Mike India. But our practice is in M&A, we really help our clients from the very beginning of pre-early diligence all the way out to signing and closing and post-close. So this is a really good classic example of what we do in the M&A healthcare space. Jackie, let's go to the next page. I do want to talk about site of service transformation a little bit as well. I know COVID has really, really changed the way we deliver care. And primarily, I think pretty much all of you have probably done at least one virtual care with your doctor. And there's been a lot of skepticism out there whether this virtual care is really here to stay. And all data is pointing to that it is actually here to stay. People are truly valuing not having to drive to the doctor's office, not having to sit in the waiting room for 30 minutes, and really being able to log in at home, log in the office. Doctors are also valuing that they don't have to be in their office. They can be anywhere. They can be at home. So that really enables doctors to see more patients in a shorter amount of time. And so that really changes also the real estate footprint, as Melinda mentioned. You don't need as many space to really accommodate the wait room and all your accommodate all the patients within the four walls. And that really helps, that really changes the way we think about the real estate in our care delivery organization. The last piece I want to mention is around home care. So here's another major deal that Mike and I are working on is a home health business that our major provider, Humana, recently acquired. It's public news that it's one of the biggest transactions that Humana has ever done this is another classic payvider example of payer really getting into the provider space and really putting money to home health, where we're seeing a lot more better outcomes of patients at home, being treated at home at a more affordable cost. So let me just stop here. I know we have more to go and pass over to Jackie.
Thanks, June. So another trend that we're seeing is obviously establishing and optimizing strategic relationships that Melinda gave an overview to earlier. And this is where our growth strategy practice really shines. And when we look at lots of big data, look at primary data in terms of interviews, and then secondary data in terms of surveys and other market data that's available, especially in healthcare, with all the copious amounts of data that's out there. And we bring it together and we start to look at various strategic partnerships for our clients. There are different types. So there's obviously a strategic partnership, there's a collaborative partnership, there's a joint venture, or there's an outsourcing and offshoring. One that was in your backyard in Chicago that we served was the Lurie Children's and the Rush Medical clinical affiliation. We supported this a couple of years ago and it was announced in January and was extremely exciting. And this is when we conducted about 150 physician primary interviews, as well as did a lot of secondary market analysis to recommend a clinical affiliation for the two entities to come together to better serve the community. It was an unbelievable analysis, and I'm glad that Lurie and Rush were able to announce the deal. We basically took a lot of different data sets, brought it together, showed them how the market was responding to various pressures for both capacity within their facilities, as well as expertise from an academic medical institution perspective. And we're able to bring them together in a clinical affiliation to better serve the community in Chicago. And then Mike, I think you're going to talk about the last trend.
Sure, Jackie, thank you. It's always tough to follow anything when someone says it's for the kids, but it was for the kids. So that really was, I think, from a local standpoint, a very interesting, honestly rather hard and difficult engagement to get through, because there's lots of politics that are involved with hospital administration and university administration in some regard. So I think the answer is to put forth the data, show the information, and just show people where they stand. And then folks ultimately don't like to be outliers; they'd like to revert to the mean. And so I think data helps equip people to make informed decisions, and that was certainly an example of that. So in this last pillar here, before we kind of flip over and get into our Q&A session and do a little bit of a introduction to some of our DePaul alum, the last pillar that we see affecting that $4 trillion of spend, which is probably not a surprise to many of you, is where does the capital come from? So as I said at the outset, there's a very unique market in U.S. healthcare where only this sort of bizarre mix of company profile types and governments interact. It's very different in almost every other subsector. So one thing that is very true, though, is, and I like to say this because it gives, I think, some perspective. The numbers are probably a little bit off, but mostly true. There's roughly 30 global there's roughly 30 global life sciences companies that sort of govern the globe and govern how medicine is developed, roughly give or take 30 global businesses. There's roughly, although there's a new one in Illinois, I think that's going to IPO, 18 global car manufacturers. I think, depending on what you would classify Samsung and Apple as, there's really only 3 semiconductor companies globally that are really worth anything. So when you start to think about these other sectors, what you end up with is extreme scale on a global level. But in healthcare, it's extremely fragmented. It's literally at the opposite end of that spectrum. I think there's something like 800,000 physicians and physician entities or physician-owned businesses out there. So, and that's just that. I think there's 165 hospital systems with more than $1 billion of revenue. So when you start to think about that 4 trillion, that slide that we showed earlier is extremely fragmented and variable. And as you look into the market anywhere, where should a market, if you were to pick a market to disrupt, what would be the characteristics of that market? Well, you probably want one that's really, really big, number one. You'd probably want one that's extremely fragmented. And you would probably want one where there is, a lot of kind of barriers to operating and entry, so that if you can find a way through it, there's a lot of value in it. And one of the ways that we see this market consolidating is not just through corporate strategic M&A, but I believe the private equity role in this market plays a pretty significant hand in this consolidation as well. And so what you're seeing here is just a little bit of a smattering of private equity funds that have a vested interest in scaling the market broadly across healthcare in the United States, but partnering with corporate clients in new ways. And so when you think about the degree of fragmentation in healthcare broadly, the corporate clients can do a lot of work, but they're probably going to do it a lot slower in general. Whereas the private equity clients are going to make 5 acquisitions, maybe 10 in a year on their platform. So what you end up with is corporate clients who have a long run view on the healthcare market, but not necessarily having the muscle memory on how to roll up a market and consolidate a market to scale it. And so what they'll do is they'll engage with a private equity partner that has a mutual strategic interest, and they'll create an entity, a joint venture or something similar, where they will go to market together. And they will use the private equity fund to drive growth and drive scale at speed in a way that the corporate clients cannot. And then 5 years later down the road, once that company has grown in size, grown in scale, grown in consistency, markets, and reach, they'll sell the rest of the shares back to the corporate company to run over the long run. So it's an interesting trend that we see accelerating at the minute, but it's born out of the extreme fragmentation on the market. So I think with that, I did see a question come up, but we actually are going to run, I think, into the Q&A session. So it says it wasn't that long that Amazon, JP Morgan Chase, Berkshire Hathaway, Haven was looking to make big waves in healthcare, but then absolutely fell apart. Do you see a lot of glaring flaws in that as we have? So it's an interesting question. The answer is I do see some flaws in the model, but 3 years ago, the only thing that any consultant would talk to you about is Amazon. And I think in some regard, that still occurs, is, Amazon is a new entrant, Amazon is going to do this, Amazon is going to do that. And to be honest with you, I think Amazon is going to continue on its path, as is Apple, as will Google. But to be frank, as will Cerner in new and different ways, as will Epic in new and different ways. And I think, just yesterday, a Chicago-based company, Walgreens, the CEO, there was an interview done with her, and, she actually was asked this question, are you afraid of Amazon? And, her answer was, no, because I think while people are interested in what they can do, I'm pretty interested in what we can do. And so I think that there's a lot of fanfare around Amazon. And don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean that it isn't a real threat. It doesn't mean that they won't come for, your share of the market. But what it's really doing is it's inspiring and accelerating our payer, our pharmacy, and our provider clients to think differently in new and different ways, to find faster new ecosystem partners that they become less disrupted in the market themselves. So that's where these new entrants, these new partnerships with private equity, that's where these new arrangements that Jackie talked about between academic health systems and other health systems, everybody is rethinking their deals right now to find scale, find stability, because Amazon is moving at pace and other technology firms are moving at pace too. So while I don't think the model that Amazon's trying to follow is, the model that they will ultimately run in the end, I do think the credit is, owed to them because there is a desire to disrupt the market. Back in what I said, this is a market that is worthy of disrupting for all of our benefit. Lower cost of care, greater access, better health equity, better outcomes. I think anybody who's invited to try and scale the market to those benefits, is a welcome player in my view. So maybe if we can just,
Hey, Mike,
go ahead. Yep.
Maybe just one, and I'll take my own behavior and my husband's behavior as an example about just the complexity of healthcare. So to your point, I think, look, there needs to be more testing, more innovation, honestly, more failures. And I was at a different firm when this was announced, and I remember sitting in a partner meeting and every one of us went, there's no way. So it's just a question, let's take the over under. And part of the reason why that we said that was because of how they talked about changing the paradigm of healthcare for their members and not fundamentally understanding kind of the drivers and honestly the irrationality associated with healthcare. So my husband is the CEO of a startup that focuses on logistics. And what he always said is there was more data in healthcare, it would be fine. And I always just say there is more data than they know what to do with. It's not actionable. And okay, I'll give you, we need actionable data. But then how do you deal with incentives? How do you deal with fragmentation of care delivery? How do you deal with the fact that if I change employers, I totally change my insurance and all of my information doesn't travel with me? Or even when I'm on the same insurance with the same employer, but I change plans, the insurance company thinks I'm a new member. So I think that, Mike, to your point, they made a very, very splashy announcement. And while I think they had every intent of achieving that, I think they didn't really understand the incremental nature in which some of these things have to happen. And then I'll just, again, as I said, I'll take my own experience. I'm on a high deductible plan. Knock on wood, I'm healthy. But every January when I go and fill my prescription, I look at the pharmacist at Walgreens and I go, that can't be right. I can't owe $300 to you because I have health insurance. I go, oh, deductible. I am the most educated health consumer probably on the planet, given the role that I play and how long I've been at it. And every January without fail, I have the exact same reaction. Now, if you take that and apply it to a general population with far less understanding, far less sophistication, and honestly, far more emotion associated with healthcare decisions, you can understand the complexity of what's going on there. So I applaud the effort. I think they will come back. And Mike, I think you're right. Even Amazon in the pharmacy space, which comparatively to changing the healthcare on behalf of employers and employees, it's far, I'll say, simpler, has just run into a number of roadblocks. They'll eventually figure out, but it won't be as fast as what I think we expected when we think about selling things online or being consumer focused.
Yeah, I agree. And I do want to move us forward. And there's a couple other questions here, but if you ask me, if not Amazon, who do you think has a model that might be one of interest that really can change the way this market works? I think Walmart does. I like Walmart's full transparency, retail, trust model that will span years, and it's a cash-based model. And so I think I was in a meeting with one of the large health insurers when they were kind of going down this Amazon path, and they looked at us and said, it's Walmart that scares us more, that could create a insurance company on the back of its working capital that has access points and trusts with people, but will do it through a cash market and transparent manner first, which is what every health insurance company doesn't want to do. So anyway, just interesting thought here. And as we turn the page, yes, we've got our contact information here, which we'll kind of show at the end here. And so I want to make sure that folks can find a way to us if you should have additional questions. And then maybe we can just, Kristen, start with you. And, there's a question in here about, non-traditional backgrounds working in health as well. So maybe as you and Danny kind of think through your introductions, just maybe highlight that too.
Absolutely. So as you all know, my name is Kristen Little. As I said before, I'm from Gurnee, Illinois. I went to UIC undergrad where I studied anthropology and international studies. So did not know anything about consulting, had never heard of consulting, had no idea that this profession even existed. And then so immediately after school, I did a master's in international public service at DePaul, where I focused on international development and humanitarian affairs. Had big dreams of working for the World Health Organization or the Gates Foundation, one of those, but ended up falling into consulting at a boutique firm in New York called Rabin Martin. And it's a global health strategy firm. And I can talk more about that if someone has questions, but it's essentially the intersection of public health and private sector dollars. So very interesting work. I learned a lot. I did a brief stint at KPMG within its corporate citizenship group, focusing on partnerships with health-focused nonprofit organizations. And then I went to business school at Emory. And like I said earlier, I'm in the corporate and growth strategy practice here. So a very windy, creative path to coming to consulting and anyone can reach out to me to talk about that, because who would have thought an anthropology major would be in business? So, but yeah, so at EYP, I focus on growth strategy. And so I've done projects with different health insurance companies, and I've been kind of dabbling in other areas as well, recently in digital transformation. So you can really just satisfy any interest in the world of consulting, definitely. Outside of that, I love to help people get here. So been focusing on recruiting both at DePaul and Emory. I'm also involved in our Black Professionals Network. And so in the future, I would love to remain here for a few years and grow within the firm, and eventually pivot to maybe doing corporate development or take my talents to a VC firm. Who knows? You know, it's a long career. You'll have many careers, you'll see. And my favorite DePaul memory is when I studied abroad in Tanzania. I did a trip to Arusha, and it was amazing, beautiful country, hiked Kilimanjaro, and yeah, I'll hand it over to Daniel.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, this, like I mentioned, from Chicago, I went to undergrad at DePaul, got my finance degree there. And so it wasn't the, still not the economic route and stuff, but still had a little bit of a finance background. My career track was not as cool as Kristen's. I started off working at DePaul. I did the housing. I was a lead desk receptionist at all your dorms. I did move in and move out. And then at the same time, while I was working at DePaul, I also worked at Bonobos, which is a men's clothing store. So didn't have too much of a finance background, even though I studied finance coming into consulting. So there's a lot of other stuff. But I think that was the great thing about coming to EYP and consulting is that, you don't have to have that straight consulting background, that finance background, the economic background is where there's a lot of different folks, a lot of different backgrounds coming into here, which gives, a lot of different experiences, a lot of different perspectives on things and helps the team grow. And so, during my time here at EYP, I am a generalist. And so, unlike Mike or Melinda, where they're a little bit more focused on the healthcare, I'm just kind of touching different areas of it. So I've done some work on the healthcare side. I've done some front end and back end transformation work for order to cash companies. I've worked on a SPAC for an advanced manufacturing company. Done some internal work within our own EY firm as well too. And so a lot of different projects on the client side. And then on the internal side, similar to Kristen, like giving back to the folks. So here for recruitment with DePaul as well as non-core schools as well too. So if there's any questions about that, feel free to ask as well. There are a few community of practices that I do lead and take a part of within EYP. And then a cool thing that I also just completed this past week was a tool for some of our leadership within EY. So, you do get a lot of fun stuff where if you can't do it on the client side, got to do it on the internal side as well too. And then looking forward, definitely would like to go back to get an MBA as well too. We looked at CalSTAT, looked at some other schools. So maybe coming back to DePaul, being a Blue Demon again, which would be nice. And kind of, along with that DePaul mindset and the ascension of community, want to look for engagements and roles that give back to the community. And I think healthcare, the Lurian's Children project that was just, explained a little while ago, I think that's a great opportunity, right, to giving back to the community. And so looking for ways to do that as well too at my time at UI. And similar to Kristen, my favorite DePaul memory was also study abroad. That's when I studied in London for a little bit time there. So good time there.
Great. That's great, Danny. Guys, we do have some questions. I'd love to just, spend a little time on it. And then we can kind of wrap with a slide that we'll share with you on how to submit a resume, to us. We have an open enrollment, but we'll get to that in a second. But just a couple things. I want to go back, June. Thank you for, servicing the chat queue while we're speaking here. But a couple of things. So there's an interesting question around, do you have sort of different backgrounds and can you work in the health practice without a degree in economics? The answer is, of course, yes. As I think about different backgrounds, we actually have nurses that we work with. We have physicians, intensivists, if you ask them specifically, that have, business degrees or business training as well. We actually have 3 people on our team from the American Medical Association here in Chicago as well. They work there in strategy. And then we have folks like Jackie, who, I think Jackie, if I'm not mistaken, you worked at Children's Hospital in Atlanta for a while too. So, maybe do you want to highlight a little bit of, Jackie, your background and how you've come into this as well?
Yeah, so I made my way through undergraduate recruiting. I went to a small school up in Boston area called Babson. I had no idea what I wanted to do when I grew up. And like Kristen said, you have many careers. So I found my way into consulting via a hospital where I did an administrative fellowship, fell in love with healthcare, fell in love with being in the provider space. But when I was in the provider space, it was a for-profit, privately held hospital. I knew there was more to healthcare in the US than that. So I actually went to KPMG as well. I was there for a couple of years in their healthcare practice before I went back to children's, because I just went back and forth, loved being in the provider space, loved, of course, serving children. So I was in the strategy practice at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta for a number of years before getting my MBA. Then I realized, I can do so much more and help so many more people if I go back into consulting. So landed here at UI Parthenon, and I love what we do every day. That Lurie Children's in Rush was one of my projects, and it was one of my favorite engagements while I was here. And it just, you feel good, you feel like you're making an impact while at the same time progressing your career and being challenged every day.
Thanks, Jackie. And I think there's some interesting questions here, and maybe I'd invite the team to kind of share a little bit of, some of the tools that they use. But the answer is we do use a number of statistical tools, a number of analytical tools, but we use them for different purposes. And so maybe I'll highlight a few and just give a sense for how we use them. And then, others on the call here from EYP, just feel free to weigh in. Oftentimes what we use, quite regularly is the Alteryx, software solution, which helps us move through large data sets and map and organize data in ways that we can develop insights in a very repeatable manner. There was a engagement that June and I were a part of earlier on this year, and we had to sort of look back upon every single clinical transaction and care event that they delivered to patients over the course of 2 years. And I think June, it was like 38 million rows of data or something like this.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken. And we used the data download extract from their electronic health record and just loaded into Alteryx. And then we spent some time with the client to understand the mapping and the taxonomy and the structuring of that data to develop a key that allowed us to use Alteryx to generate insights and answers faster than they've ever been able to. June, I don't know if you want to just talk a little bit more. I know there's a few others that we use. We certainly do, Python and R and some others, but anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I think anything you hear in the market, we do use them. That's kind of, I think we also have some proprietary tools that we've developed internally called Health Navigator, which is another market analytics tool. And then we use a lot of BI tools and dashboards, if you will, that really help interpret data, present data much faster.
I mean, we used to use Tableau, but I think that's, kind of people don't use that as much as they used to. Yeah.
Except for the blues.
Except for the blues.
Well, June, I think the other thing is beyond the technical data that we use, which 100% we do, right? We want to use data to inform our answer instead of just coming and saying we're really smart people and here's the answer. We want to pressure test it. We want to push our thinking. It's how to think about data within the context of a problem, right? So you can beat up data to get whatever answer you want. Trust me, I've done it. And I think the one thing that as I transitioned from a graduate program where, your 95% confidence interval was like the minimum that you were comfortable with into business where people said, what's a confidence interval, is how do you take that data, the imperfect data, and actually make decisions off of it, right? So you have to know it's imperfect. So you need to know where some of the potential faults are, what the limitations of the data are, and really effectively communicate that. But being someone who is comfortable with data analytics, comfortable with different types of tools, comfortable with different types of methodologies is, I think has a unique position coming into consulting because they are going to be armed with that I'll say skepticism around the problem, but also the ability to kind of work through it in a way that's logical and has foundational components to it that actually let you get to an answer better, smarter, and more efficient.
That's great stuff. Hey, Charles has his hand up here and has been waiting patiently. So I think his virtual hand is getting tired.
Hey,
So why don't we
Charles.
hear from him here? Go ahead, Charles.
Hi, yeah, I guess I was wondering in that vein of with regard to the data analytics in general, how often is economics directly involved in the sense like you would be using regression to predict demand for insurance in a city or something? How often does it impact like the way you interpret it? Like it's not really directly involved, but maybe you saw smoking went down in a place and maybe the hospitals would be worth less.
Yeah.
How does it impact just none of it? Like, how is it completely different? Where do those three lines separate, I guess?
So I'm happy to take this one. So, I run Monte Carlo simulations every once in a while on my own. So for me, it's always the framework through which I put my lens on. I will tell you, in a business context, it is never as rigorous, beautiful, or as perfect as within when we assume a can opener in economics. There are some applications though. So I spent a good amount of my time early in my career, and even now when I think through product, of doing, chondrite analysis and, trade-off decision-making and surveying, and bringing that kind of, I'll say, practical from the economic side of people are imperfect and we need to kind of understand that, or systems or companies or insert whatever, and how do I actually get to an answer that I feel good about, right? So I use those kind of, I'll say, economic or social science tools frequently in my work, despite being a partner, right? Where I joke, don't let me open an Excel file or you'll be sorry that you let me do it. But as June and Mike said, I think a lot of this still is, and yes, regressions or programming, but a lot of this is around more what is the right types of data to bring in, what's the right visualization of the data to bring in, right? I think that's where, at least on my client side, they still struggle to have a single source of truth that allows them to make decision making, right? So we're still at early stages in terms of healthcare, but I use those tools quite frequently in my work. I wouldn't say it's an everyday occurrence, but far more frequently than maybe when I thought, when I left graduate school and entered into the profession. But team, kind of other thoughts of how you guys think about some of those, I'll say, harder analytics or maybe more academic approaches?
I don't know if it's a tool in so much as it is, when we're exploring the combination of two businesses or maybe the separation of two businesses. I mean, whether you want to call it financial analysis or you would call it managerial accounting or transfer pricing or something like that. What I would say is when you're bringing two businesses together that have some kind of a production within them, and that might be utilization of a facility, or it might be, an actual production line on a pharmacy, or it might be some kind of production of some nature. We tend to use a lot of, I would call it maybe more microeconomic principles, where you're looking at the cost curves, what's fixed, what's variable, what's the margin that drops out of the marginal next unit, what's the waste that runs into that, and or inefficiency that is running through the business. And we tend to use those types of analyses as well. And like I said, if you considered it, sort of a microeconomic understanding your cost curves within the business, or accounting or finance or managerial accounting, I don't know. But all I know is that we need to find, a clear sense for what really the true economics and the efficiency of the business services are. And so, we do, some work there too. It looks like, Steve, you've got your hand up now that I figure out how we can see the hands.
Thanks. How do you guys evaluate the accuracy, the truthfulness, and the completeness of the data that you get? What kind of mechanisms exist for that sort of evaluation?
June, June or Jackie, team, do you guys want to kind of take this one? Because I think it's a real world and a constant question, Steve,
Yeah. So I think there's an easy answer to financial data. You reconcile it to the financial statement. So that's the easy part. But when we're talking about just patient data, clinical data, I think,
If you think about like the waterfalls, for example, for data, when you're thinking about date of service, bill date, collect date, cash collect, stuff like that.
right. I think I mean, that's where, you know, so we are, I guess, when data isn't complete, I mean, there's you know, usually a lot of common sense to really to know where your holes are, to really understand, do you even have data that represents the entire population, or do you have the data that represents the entire time period? And within those, you really need to figure out how to build your hypothesis to make decision off of it. Now, how to really come up with a scientific way to tell where the gaps of your data is. I guess I'm not a kind of a data analytics person to come up with that, but we really try to build a hypothesis that really shows the evidence that there is some regression or correlation as to when, for example, how long payers take to pay the bills across the last 4 years, 5 years in different states, to really build a hypothesis despite of the incompleteness of the data, we help our clients make a decision off of it. So yeah, I guess I'm not the best person to answer that, but I do know that we try really hard to use the data.
No, June, I think you hit it. I think you hit it right, because it's about the hypothesis going in, right? And so you look at the data, and I'll take a very real example. I was looking at utilization on behalf of a payer. I had worked for them for 5 years, and I was looking from the current period, and I was comparing it to the previous period, I think 2 years prior. And the numbers were so wildly different of ER utilizations by like 20% of what they were. So, then you start to go, okay, well, why? What is it? Do we have did I not pull the data? Is there something missing? Did you put a program in place? Do you have a definition that's different, right? So that's typically the other thing too, right? That they may start classifying data differently. So it's not just about taking the data and saying the data is always perfect and it's 100%. It's looking at the data, doing the sniff test, having the hypotheses to go and validate that, talking to the client. Also, we bring a ton of external market data to bear, right? So I've been around the block enough to kind of know what good utilization looks like across different sites of care. So if you tell me it's 20% of what my number, expected to be on either way, right? Negative or positive, I immediately start asking questions. And so that's what it is. And, it took me a long time to be comfortable doing that, right? Because that wasn't how I was trained. But in a business context, that you do have to have a little bit more leeway and comfort saying it's not perfect. I understand what the limitations are, and I've kind of guardrailed what I think the right answer is, and then I move to try and be as accurate as possible within those guardrails.
I do want to get to the last page because it's important for folks. Steve, I love your question though. And in M&A, if you don't have a good sixth sense for the data that you need in order to prove the question or answer the question, whatever you need to do, there's a very good chance that the client that you're serving is going to, overvalue an asset or undervalue an asset, or maybe be, hiding something. So one of the things that, doing M&A work a lot, brings upon the consultant is the ability to issue spot things quickly with that experience, because it's very likely that data will be incomplete for you to get, the right answer. And so there's a premium placed on issue spotting and speed and the use of the data you have, all the while expecting that they're not going to give you everything that it is. So that's just a diligence trick that I think over time, many of us do develop. But it's a great question because it's very practically true. I do know that we're sort of at the end of our time here, but I wanted to make sure that folks could see this here. So we'll go ahead and send out all of our email addresses to you all. You've got some additional ones here. I wanted to just call attention. On October 8th is the application deadline for applying for undergraduate applications, with EY Parthenon. And so the link is here. We tested them. They do work. Jackie assured me of that. But we'll make sure to go ahead and get, these links out to you, just so if you are so inclined and would like to explore opportunities with us as a summer associate and or an undergraduate in the full-time sense, we'd love to see you in the pipeline. And, Ryan and Alan and Danny and Kristen, who are on the call, myself included, let us know if you're submitting, because we'll be on the lookout for them if they should make the queue in the submission portal. But, with that, Tony, I want to just hand it back over to you. But before I do, just thank everyone for the time, the questions, and the engagement. Just very happy and honored to spend the time with you all today.
Well, this has been terrific, Mike. Thank you so much. Mike, Jackie, Danny, Kristen, June, who am I forgetting? Others, yes, the whole team. I'm so glad you were able to do this. I'm glad we had so many questions. I have like only a dozen or so that I wrote down just in case nobody had any. So those will have to wait, sadly. But thank you all again, and attendees, get a job there. It looks like a great place. I think I went. No, I'm not going to apply. Sorry, my boss is on the phone, is on the Zoom here, so I'm not going to do that. This is recorded, so maybe some of you are watching this on YouTube. As they say on YouTube, smash that like button and subscribe to the Econ department. And again, thanks, and have a great rest of your